Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Future Tech podcast series. This is a podcast series aimed at STEM graduates across many of the London universities and Dutch universities. And it's me, Charlie Sell, the MD of Arrows Group, where I'm interviewing CTOs, CIOs, thought leaders within the technology space, finding out a bit more about their background, thoughts on emerging technologies, and the killer question, advice to all those STEM graduates out there. So really happy to have Craig Bell with me today. Craig is the former CTO of the Cordon Group, now on working with entrepreneurial businesses, startup businesses, and is very much a thought leader within digital transformation. Some of the stuff he's done throughout his career is super impressive and has been at the forefront of it. So Craig, really happy to have you on the show. How are you today?
Thanks, Charlie. Yeah, really good. Yeah, or should I say goedemorgen for our Dutch contingency. But yeah, all good. Pleasure to be here. It's a podcast that I've followed for quite a few months, so I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, great. And actually, it's funny, we were talking the other day, we both lived in Holland for 5 or more years.
True. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, absolutely. I've very fond memories of Den Haag, and yeah, probably some of the best years, I think.
Yeah. Same here. I remember I moved to Holland for what was meant to be a year, ended up being 6, because you sort of fall in love with the place, don't you?
It's easy to get on with, right? And it's flat. What's not to love, right? It's the people are lovely. You know, it's all good. Interesting. When I first went out there, I actually worked for a British school. So you're talking about STEM, but actually, my first job out there was for the British School in the Netherlands, which is a kind of multi-tenant, multi-site school, international school. So kind of goes right back to STEM, actually.
Oh, well, that's interesting, because that leads basically into the first question, because what we'd love to hear is a little bit about your story, how you got into technology and a bit of the career.
Yeah, I want to say it was an accident as such, but my degree was in Stirling University. I studied business studies, so I've always been sort of business focused initially. But I've always had that kind of nerdy, geeky background. You know, and when I think of IT people, we're always somewhere on the spectrum. So I equate that I was probably going to be a leading businessman in the traditional route. So I'd always had little side entrepreneurial things, buying PCs and selling them at uni or whatever. And it just seemed sort of natural that eventually I'd end up in the tech space. What happened though was the penultimate semester at university, one of the modules I took was entrepreneurial studies. It was a local company up in Dunblane, so just a few miles from Stirling. And it was a company that had built its past on data center cleaning. So it's specific cleaning, it's down to, the micro filters, all that kind of stuff. And, not just bringing in a Henry Hoover or whatever, but really, complex cleaning. And they were branching out. This was pre-Y2K. So for, STEM now, I'm going to have no idea what we're talking about. But before year 2000, there was this big bug and everybody was expecting that the whole world would crash and we'd all die and, go feral, essentially. That didn't happen, by the way, just for people who've just tuned in. And they were looking at asset management around Y2K assets. So essentially, they were looking to start a new business, RFL Asset Management. They wanted to get research done by graduates or undergraduates, and myself and two fellow students who were studying the same module were given this company to go away and research. So they wanted to know, is there a market for BIOS testing of Y2K computers, servers, software? Will the software still run? So it's like basically desktop audits. It was like the inroads to desktop audits. And I went away, we did all the research, but it clearly came across that I was kind of leading the project. We delivered it back as a report and a presentation, and I went back and finished my final semester. When I graduated, contacted them, said, just sort of drop by, see how it's going, and they're like, perfect. So they'd liked the report, they'd taken advice on sort of taking advice on board, even the costing model, the software to use, and they'd essentially started that business within their own group. So I came in as a second person. And one thing I do remember from being at uni is when you graduate, you just know everything, right? You know everything better, you know everything, you can do it quicker, you're smarter, and everybody else is stupid and old. And so I really went there thinking, this is just amazing. And they just won the business to audit every single PC that belonged to Railtrack, which is now the national railways, right? So it was 7,000 plus PCs across the UK, and they'd run this multi-million pound business. So I was the lead on that. I had to suddenly get other graduates in to coordinate cars around the UK. We used floppy disks back then, so it was like literally floppy disks on every machine, loading them back in. And I just thought I knew everything. Looking back now, I would have been petrified about the project, but then I'm like, this is easy. So that's how I got into IT. It's a slightly convoluted answer, but that's how it all came around, really.
Fantastic. Well, there's a lesson already there of beta advice, isn't it? That from even work experience, turning that into future job opportunities with
Absolutely.
an entrepreneurial mindset.
Very true. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, good point.
So getting to CTO level, what was the route that you followed?
Yeah. So I think what I did, I wouldn't say job hopped, because generally I've always had perm roles. I've always typically done a minimum of 2.5 years in each role. But I rarely move within the company. So I rarely progress within a company. So I generally, after 2.5 years, get a bit bored when things become business as usual and predictable. Then it's ready for somebody else to have a crack. And so, from that early job that we spoke about, post Y2K, the company made me redundant, which was fine back then. It was all good. Within 2 weeks, I was working for a software company in Edinburgh, a company by the name of Axios Systems, which is still going today, a big IT service management company. And just gradually, I did a bit of training at home. I did what used to be the Microsoft MCSE with Windows NT4 and all that stuff, and just did that at home and did my exams on, through textbooks and all that stuff. And that then got me the next role, which was in The Hague, and that was an IT manager role. So I always tend to shoot for roles that are outside of my comfort zone and that I'm really pushing myself for. And so far I've been quite fortunate with that. And moving into the C role, what I was confident or conscious of, was that I'd done loads of infrastructure and operations, project management, service management, cloud, SaaS, you name it, but never had any software development exposure. So when I was with Cordant, I was kind of keen, and I was the IT service delivery director, to manipulate into the role of CTO. And that's obviously something that I managed to pull off. That was really useful, because that's given me that. I see it as almost like a three-leg stool. You've got the infrastructure, operations, and software development. And I think that's probably, like a stool well balanced.
Yeah, fantastic. So from what you've seen with Gordon and over the last 5 years, and your thoughts on emerging technologies, where do you see the technology landscape moving to? What excites you in thinking around the future?
This is a good question, and it's a question everyone's asking, right? I think there's two areas. For me, it's all about IoT, so the Internet of Things. Yeah. I've been putting loads of posts recently about how crazy I've been automating the house, and just flashing firmware on different devices, just going nuts, right? Just to try and immerse myself in that. I think IoT, I think in particular security around IoT and smart cities is an area that's sort of really fascinating. I think anything to do with security is obviously the CISO. If I was to start all over again, I would definitely go down the kind of ethical hacker. And if it went wrong, I'd probably turn into an unethical hacker. Just, go live on a boat somewhere, Caribbean. So yeah, I think IoT, and then the flip side to IoT is actually 5G. I think that's going to open up huge opportunities. Clearly, you don't need the bandwidth for IoT, and often they run over on GPRS, 2G. But in fact, I see the flip side of enablement is going to be the 5G. The speeds that we're going to expect and have available, the whole landline, it's all the FTTC, FTTP, all those fiber to the property. I don't see that coming. I think that 5G will just penetrate the market, and we will just consume vast amounts of data at high speed over 5G. And I think that would be where I'd be focusing on as well.
Yeah, and that's really interesting actually, because a lot of the other podcasts we're focused on AI and machine learning, which obviously
it's a bit hard to say now.
Well, you're right. In many ways, because for me, what I'm quite passionate about is the whole industry 4.0, which the IoT comes into. How is the world going to be automated? And it's not just for manufacturing. It's going to be across many industries, and
Mhm.
Internet of Things just being so topical when you think about how far that spreads over
Yeah,
both B2B and B2C,
absolutely.
consumer.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree entirely. And I think AI and ML are the two obvious ones, right? If we'd been speaking 3 years ago, I'd be like ranting about blockchain or something like that, right? So those are the things that these things just go cyclical in IT, don't they? I haven't seen blockchain seems to be a thing of the past almost already. I've never used it. I've spoken to people who are investigating it, but it seems to have, I won't say it's died a death, but it's definitely not as prolific as it was maybe 2 to 3 years ago, right? AI and ML, I get it, but it's also becoming more consumable. Do you need it for the majority of use cases? Do you need you know, a set of data scientists? Potentially, but you can also pick something from Google or AWS and probably, I'm sure, Microsoft and enable it, and you might have 60, 70, 80% of what you really need rather than having to get, expensive data scientists in to train stuff. And AI, if it's an algorithm, it's not, it's human trained. It's not like machines are just ruling the world, right? So for me, it's one of those things that everybody says AI, right? Whether they really mean it or not. And a few years ago, you'd just be doing an automation or you'd be doing a process execution, but you wouldn't call it AI. So it's just one of those buzzwords, I think, to an extent.
Yeah. No, and it's great to see that view on it, because there's a lot of truth behind that. I think it's when we're focusing on STEM graduates and trying to give the guys and girls advice over there. It's I think sometimes fads can take over what you need as the fundamentals, and
Yeah,
learning the fundamentals, whether that's a development language, and then
yeah,
being able to work across development languages. The
yeah.
whole polyglot engineering concept
Hmm.
for people there, and as you said, from an infrastructure perspective, thinking around AWS cloud technologies maybe,
That's right.
rather
Yeah,
than
yeah, definitely.
purely.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that you've now had visibility. You come from a really strong infra background, and then with Gordon Group, you purposely also then made sure that you understood the development side of it.
Yes.
Any thoughts on where people who are studying development, and whether they're traditional skills like .NET or
Hmm.
Java, where do you
Yeah.
see that moving over the coming years?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. That's something I've been thinking about as well. I think certainly serverless frameworks are around for a while. So the likes of Lambda in AWS, we've recently coded quite significantly around that. It's really cost effective. I think innovation and startups, I know it's again, a little bit cliched, but I just see that as being such a good market. The number of interesting conversations I had, one or two today, certainly one yesterday, where they were looking for CTOs. They wanted to offer a reduced salary, but with the promise, and I'm using air quotes, of an exit strategy at 3 years and you'll have 1 million or something like that, right? And 20 years ago, absolutely, where I am now, can't really afford to take that drop in salary on a pretend, and maybe it will come true, right? 1 in 5 probably will, or 1 in 10, whatever that kind of ratio might be. So that would be interesting for a STEM graduate, I think, it's definitely startup. I see there's lots of cash around for investment, and some of the seed funds get £150,000 as a startup is quite attractive. And if you're not dependent, if you don't have dependents and you don't have mortgages and all the rest of the stuff, and typically as a graduate you probably don't, I think that would be really exciting, personally.
Yeah, no, again, I totally agree with you on that. It's you learn by as many of your failures as you do your successes,
Yeah,
and it's better to do the failures when you're young and
absolutely.
without the
Yeah,
commitments, and as long as you're always
100%.
learning. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I agree with that.
And so thinking about advice then, when people listening to the podcast, and
Hmm.
either they're starting their university course or
Yeah,
finishing, so they're about to think about the job market, what advice would you give, probably more aimed at the people who are going to be graduating over the next year or
yeah.
two? Any pearls of wisdom?
Yeah, I guess. I think you need to try and find a differentiator, right? It's so many people. It's just like every industry, right? IT is a booming industry, but that said, there's a lot of people looking for work currently. So, what makes you different? It's finding that quirk, that USP. Um, it's just being different to the next candidate. It's probably having if you're a developer, then having a really good GitHub repository that's open for people to view. It's not having a traditional CV. Maybe it's a good LinkedIn profile, but a really good GitHub repository, something along those lines. It could be a vlog or whatever it is. Just get something out there to make you different. I look at so many CVs, and it's difficult, right? I get it. I mean, I look at some of the job applications, even at CTO level, 250 plus applicants, right, according to LinkedIn. So it's networking, it's relationships, it's being creative, and I think it's also for me, it's about being true to yourself, right? And what do I mean by that is, do you really want to be in IT, right? Are you that passionate person, or was it because you didn't get into, I don't know, or your parents told you need to be doing IT and not philosophy or something along those lines, right? So is that really your passion? And that's what I always look for when I'm looking for people in IT. I've worked with some really good people, and you just see that, the spark in their eyes when you're chatting to them. I think that's key. One of the sort of anecdotal stories around recruitment, just briefly to sort of underpin this, I was hiring for 3 junior developers, and this goes back to the CV piece. What I wanted to do was, rather than pay recruitment fees, sorry, Charlie, but what I decided to do was try and have a go filling them myself, so on the cheap. So what we did was, we came up with the idea that we would actually do a hacker job.
Yep.
So we spoke to a company, Freshdesk, Freshservice, a company we already use. Said, right, do you have any space? They're like, yep, we've got a free open floor at one of the WeWorks. So we'll put you up for WeWork, give you an entire floor to yourselves. We'll throw in lunch. There's a pre-bar afterwards. You just need to fill it, right? That's fine. Can we have access to your APIs? Can you give some test environments? Yes, did that. Advertised it on LinkedIn, put it on Eventbrite. Did not ask for a single CV. Just put out, this is the code. We're going to set you a coding challenge. This is what we expect you to code in. Come to the event. We had, I think it was around 15 people rock up. We paired them up, gave them the challenge, said, right, there you go, crack on. Off the back of that, we did face-to-face interviews during the day. But again, not one single resume. At the end of the day, they presented their coding efforts that they'd achieved. We offered 3 junior dev roles out of that, hired 3, and retained at least 2 years in. And that's fascinating. So it's things like that your new graduates need to be thinking about. It's not the traditional CV. Is it creating a coding for free, or sending some sample code into a business? Is it looking at whatever sector you want to be in, writing a proof of concept and sending it to a company saying, right, here you go, hire me, I've just done this for you. And I think those are the things.
Yeah. And again, I couldn't agree with you more around that spark in your eye, being passionate about something. Yeah. I think future employers, in my experience, people will take a 70% fit from an education background or even a skills background if you show the will, if you're passionate and you show that you're willing to learn. And again, with graduates entering the market, that gets you so much further. Because if you thought, one of the last questions is more around the communication skills, because technology has moved, as we know. It's no longer in the basement of a company and seen as sort of the service center. It's very much the profit center of many businesses.
Right. Yeah.
How important is communication skills, do you think, for the for STEM, hardcore STEM graduates when they're entering the market?
Bizarrely, I actually don't think it is. I actually really don't. I think, whilst, I get what you're saying, and IT used to be in the basement. I worked in Kuwait, and we literally were in the basement. And it almost looked like carpet on the walls. It was brown. It was pretty dingy, but it's tax-free, so it's all good. So I actually don't think it is, and that's probably not what you're expected to hear. I think, sure, getting yourself out there, it's not communication. If you're looking at a true IT professional, that's not a skill that comes natural to most IT people. When I look at the kind of typical use case of IT, that's not IT. If you're over communicating, if you're really good at communicating, then again, you're probably not true IT. And maybe I'm wrong, right? But my experience is the best IT people I've worked with are the really awkward ones that you're going to blow your stack if they're not at the desk by 9 a.m., but they might rock up at 9:45, but then they'll be working at home till gone 11 or something. So it's that tolerance. So the fact that they might not pick up the phone the first time you call, you need to kind of put that to bed. So I get it, and you're right. In an ideal world, you'd be great at communicating, but I don't see it, and I don't see it's a requirement in IT. I think, you talk about team players, we talk about all this kind of stuff. When it boils down to it, most IT people are introvert, they're socially awkward, and they're just fantastic at their job, right? They just get ones and zeros. And you need the CTO, the CIO, and a program manager or a scrum master or whoever to kind of be the conduit, right? It's almost like the babblefish of IT.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, actually, that is an interesting viewpoint, because you're right, I guess, that I think people are being conditioned that communication skills are now part. You need to be able to speak to the business as much as the technology. But actually, in my experience, even looking at salaries, some of the highest paid people in the tech teams aren't necessarily the managers and the leaders. It's actually the most technical. It's the ninjas. I think that's one of the expressions that's said commonly. Yeah. So embrace the inner geek sometimes.
100%. I agree.
Fantastic. Well, look, thank you. Some really good pearls of wisdom there. So, thank you, Craig. Really interesting to get your views on it. And actually, it's really nice to have a different balance, because, as I said, thinking around what you've been saying, that, Internet of Things being definitely an area that is future-proof, that's only going to grow. So investing your time and understanding that, and thinking around, as, to graduates out there, that actually putting yourself out there, whether it's things like GitHub or proof of concepts to future employers, and just understanding whether this is your future, whether you're passionate and you're going to put everything into it, or is it just a job? And if it's just a job, maybe think more about what you really want. So brilliant. Well, thanks for your time, Craig. Really good to have you on the show.
Thanks.
And to everyone listening, this is another series of the Future Tech podcast series. So it's going to be posted on the on Arrows Group YouTube channel, Spotify channel, and on the careers pages of the universities that we've been partnering up with. Thank you, everyone, and to the next one.
Thanks, Charlie.